Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is your host, Professor Gore, and this is Horror Unlimited. Thank you guys for joining me once again. As you can see, my great, awesome, magnificent, terrifying display, and listening to the Halloween 3 theme song. Yeah, Halloween 3 was pretty cool, man. Yeah, thank you guys for joining me once again. Thank you guys for joining me once again. Appreciate you all taking the time to look at my awesome display of films. Yeah, this is just so awesome, right? Okay. Yeah. But what I want to talk about in this video is something that's it's basically an obscure classic. That is this film here, The Antichrist. Okay, not the other films. I thought we'll talk about that. We'll talk about them in another film, video. Okay, The Antichrist. We want to talk about the Antichrist, right? And this film was also known as The Tempter. Nice little display here. I'm going to show you guys how this looks here. Nice little display here. Okay, looks pretty creepy, doesn't it? Yeah. And this scene here, as you see this lady's face right here, this was actually a scene from the film. Okay, it was actually a scene from the film. Now, let's get into the meat of this film here. The Antichrist is also known as The Tempter. This movie came out in 1974. It was released in 1974. It's an Italian demon possession movie. What's interesting about this film, too, let me give a little bit of history of this. What's interesting about this film is the fact that it was one of many demonic possession movies that came out in Italy and in areas of Europe after Warner Brothers' release of The Exorcist, which came out in 1973. The Exorcist was a huge hit overseas, and a lot of the directors and filmmakers in the European market wanted to cash in on this demonic craze. So one of these films was the Antichrist, A.K.A. The Tempter. Now, the Antichrist title, which I don't like that much, was the actual title for the film overseas. And then when they shipped it here to America, they retitled it, the producers retitled it The Tempter, which is the one I like better. But the Antichrist, A.K.A. The Tempter, was one of many Italian films about demonic possession that came out during this time. Kind of like, it's similar to Lucio Fulci's Zombie, a film that I reviewed some time ago that came out in 1979, which was trying to cash in on the Dawn of the Dead financial success. Okay, that went over that was happened overseas. But this film, The Antichrist, was one of many. Now, as you can see here, this film here, Abby. Yeah, as you can see there, Abby. I'm not going to talk about Abby, in this particular video. That's going to cover another video. But I just wanted to show you guys this film, Abby, because this box here, this DVD box here, is a double feature, as you can see, demonic double featurette, and at the bottom it's called Magdalena. And both of those films are movies about demonic possession. And they were also a part of the demonic craze. Okay. But let's just talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about this film. Now, mind you, there's going to be some spoilers. Okay. Because I don't have the software to show you guys any pictures. Plus, it would be a copyright issue anyway. I've had that situation in the past. And I had to literally delete an entire video because of it, man. It sucks. Copyright crap, right? This movie came out 300,000 years ago, and you get a copyright strike. But what I found, what is a copy? It wasn't a copyright strike, but it was a copyright mark, So I couldn't show it. But anyway, because I actually was showing scenes from the film, I was actually trying to show scenes from the film, and I couldn't do that. But anyway, The Antichrist, A.K.A. The Tempter, starts off, I'm going to give you a basic synopsis of this film, starts off with a woman who is paralyzed, paraplegic, in a wheelchair, and her and I believe her uncle go to a healing session. I think somewhere in Rome. They go to this. They drive to this healing session where there's hundreds and hundreds of people gathering around what appears to be a statue of the Virgin Mary. And there are people writhing and rolling around on the ground. I think these people apparently were possessed. And essentially what they're trying to do is get healing and deliverance from the Virgin Mary, because this is what they believe, So this young lady who's a paraplegic and wheelchair bound, that's this lady here. Yeah, she don't look like a lady here, right? Wheelchair bound, she touches the statue of the Virgin Mary, but she doesn't receive her healing. So immediately we go to the next scene, essentially, and she's in a wheelchair, and her uncle takes her in a room. She's in a wheelchair, and this is where the film kind of takes off. There's some very, very deep scenes in this movie. So I just want to give you that general synopsis. It centers on this lady here who is a paraplegic who's trying to receive healing from the Virgin Mary. She doesn't get the healing, and she's extremely distraught about it. She's upset about it. She's hurt by it. And when you watch the film, you get kind of the idea that because God turned her down, this is how she's, interpreted, because God turned her down to receive a healing, she turns to Satan, right? So that's just one scene, but I wanted to mention that as an introduction to this film. I want to deal with some other areas too, in terms of acting, special effects, plot synopsis, and that type of stuff. And I might give you guys a couple of scenes here or there. Okay, so there are spoiler alert, there will be some scenes that I might mention to kind of whet your appetite to see this film if you haven't seen it. But essentially, the plot of this film centers around this lady here, and she's essentially gets possessed by this demon. Now, I don't know what kind of demon this is. I don't know if it's the devil himself. I don't know. In The Exorcist, it was clear that the demon wasn't Satan. When you watch the film, it was the demon Pazuzu. But anyway, in this film, we don't get that revelation. We don't know what kind of demon possessed this woman. But we do know when you watch the film, you will find out that there are extreme scenes in the film that tend to point to a sexual connotation. She becomes very sexual. For example, I'll give you this one scene. Spoiler alert, okay, if you didn't see it, I'm going to spoil something. There's a scene in the film where the demon takes possession of her, right? She's in bed, but then all of a sudden this demon takes possession of her. And now the next scene comes and she's walking, right? And she's outside and she's standing at a bus stop, and this big bus comes by and picks up her and a few other people that are sitting around. And there's this guy standing next to her who keeps staring at her because she's an attractive woman. Okay, I'm trying to see if I can find how she looks without. Oh, no, they don't have any pictures of her. Well, I can't show you any pictures of her in her non-possessed state. But this guy is staring at her, and he's wooing over her, and he's drooling over her, and she's staring at him, and she's giving him the googly eyes. They get on the bus. They travel to some place, I guess it's some type of tour. And they get off the bus. She keeps staring at the guy. He's kind of like standing about maybe like 8 feet from her. They keep staring at each other, right? So she lures this guy into this private little, I don't know, look like a rock ravine or something like that. She lures him inside this place, and then they get to kissing and mooching all over each other. And the scene cuts, right? And the lady wakes up on the ground next to a wheelchair and her car, because he had a specially designed car for people who were paralyzed. So she wakes up on the scene cuts to her she's lying on the ground, and she's lying next to her wheelchair, and the little girl walks up to her and says, "Ma'am, do you need help?" Lady says, "No, I don't know how I got here." And all of a sudden the scene cuts, and we see the guy. There's a real quick, like maybe like half a second long of the guy standing up, and his head just twists around several times, all the way around. And you see him lying on his stomach, but his head has been twisted completely around, and his face is facing backwards. So that was a pretty crazy scene right there. And you know what's interesting about that scene is that when I remember watching it, and I remember thinking the statement in The Exorcist. I don't know if some of you guys remember this, but in The Exorcist, when that detective is explaining to Father Damien, the young priest, I think it was Father Damien, the young priest. He talks about how that the young girl, supposedly 12-year-old Reagan, supposedly twist that director's head completely around. Says he was thrown out the window, and said when they found him, his head was completely completely turned around, facing backwards. And I thought to myself, I wonder did this movie here, the directors steal that from that movie, The Exorcist. But I don't know. Anyway, yeah. So that's essentially a scene right there. There's another scene where she throws up in her hand, literally throws up in her hand, green vomit, and she makes this. He wasn't an exorcist in the classical sense, like the movie The Exorcist, but what an exorcist is in Roman Catholicism. Correct me if I'm wrong in this. Is the person that has been chosen to cast out the demon. Okay. But this person in this movie, the Antichrist, it weren't necessarily an exorcist. We don't get to the actual exorcism per se with an actual exorcist until the end of the film. But this guy was some kind of a magician or mystic or whatever. And he's trying to, drive this demon out the woman. So he puts all this powder around her wheelchair and all this stuff. And then she gets up and she starts levitating in the wheelchair. Anyway, to make a long story short, I'm going to talk about this one particular scene that's really disgusting. Okay, it is a spoiler alert. Okay, but it's not everything, people. She throws up in her hands and she walks up to the guy and says, lick it. And he licks the vomit out of her hand. It's disgusting. Oh my goodness. That was like rough. That makes The Exorcist look like child's play because she spits up in her hand and makes the guy lick it. I mean, it was crazy, man. It was really crazy. Yeah. So, but yeah. Now, as far as special effects in this film, the special effects some are good and some are not so good. Some of the matte special effects back in those days, particularly because this is a very low budget film, weren't as on the same level at all of The Exorcist. Dick Smith, the makeup artist for The Exorcist, was called the God of Makeup by another legendary makeup artist by the name of Tom Savini. Tom Savini did the makeup effects for George Romero's 1978 classic Dawn of the Dead. He also did a couple of special effects for another film that George Romero directed back in 1976 called Martin, which was kind of like a vampire film. He did the special effects for that film. He also did the makeup effects, Tom Savini did, for another film that George Romero directed, a couple of other films that George Romero directed, Creepshow, which came out in 1982, and George Romero's sequel to Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, which came out in 1985. Superior special effects, gory, brutal, some of the best I've ever seen. Tom Savini himself says that he called Dick Smith the God of makeup effects, okay? And when you watch The Exorcist, I can see why, because The Exorcist and the makeup effects he did for Linda Blair and her transformation into the demon is bar none some of the best I've ever seen. And yet this film here, The Antichrist, a.k.a. The Tempter, tries to fit that bill. Okay, here we have a scene here, and I'm not going to give away this scene here, which was very, very intense. Very intense, and it looks terrifying. And if you stare at this scene long enough, you stare at this picture long enough, you might get hypnotized. Okay, but this film it attempts to present FX, special effects, and makeup effects on that level, but it doesn't really do it as well. Okay, some of the scenes are clearly bad. I won't say terrible, but they're not the best. Okay, so in terms of special effects, for me, it's a mixture of good and bad. Okay, acting is okay for this kind of movie, for this kind of era. The acting is okay. One thing we got to remember about a lot of these films that came out of from Europe during the early 1970s, demon possession movies, zombie horror films, and so forth. The directors and filmmakers weren't so much focused on acting and all this kind of stuff and plot and all these type of things. That wasn't their main focus. Their main focus was to thrill you, was to terrify you, was to create a film with awesome atmosphere and awesome soundtracks. The soundtracks of these films were some of the best you could ever hear, particularly from Italy. I love many of the soundtracks of the movies from back in the 1970s. The zombie films, the demonic films, they were terrifying. So in terms of plot of acting, this film is so, okay? Plot-wise, the plot is kind of illogical in places. It's hard to follow this film in all respects. It's hard to follow the plot line of this film because there are a lot of scenes and ideas that don't seem to match up. It's almost like they're trying to say, okay, what caused, there's one particular scene where she's being hypnotized. She gets hypnotized by hypnosis. He hypnotizes her, and the purpose is to try to find out the origin of her paralysis, and I get him like, okay, yeah, but the question is, how did she get possessed, and who is this demon, And so, as I said earlier in the film, perhaps early in my review, perhaps the reasoning for this is simply because she feels rejected by God. She didn't get the healing that she wanted, so therefore she turns to Satan. But in the plot of the film, there is no clear scene where you see her turning to Satan. It's not like there's a scene where she picks up a Ouija board or does a satanic ritual or anything like that. So, yeah. So the plot is kind of hard to follow, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't see the movie. Scares, there are some good scares in the film. Are they on par with The Exorcist? I always use The Exorcist as an example because The Exorcist could be considered to be the exorcism movie of all exorcism movies. Is it on par with The Exorcist? No, but it is scary. It is scary. As you can see this particular scene right here where she's possessed and drooling at the mouth, it was an intense scene. It is scary, okay? I remember many years ago, there are some scenes rather scary. I remember many years ago when I was in high school, we didn't go to school to learn. Back in my days, back in the early to mid 80s, we didn't go to school to learn. We went to school to talk about movies. And I remember I was in one particular class, and one of the students, I don't know how this came up, but the subject of these movies, they started talking about all these different movies, mostly horror movies, because horror movies was big back in those days, because one person, my sister was telling me those were the only kind of movies that was coming out at the time, horror movies. So that's all you could talk about. But anyway, and I remember him talking about this movie called The Tempter, the Antichrist. And he said, man, you need to see that movie, the scariest movie I've ever seen in my life. Oh, this woman spits up in her hand, throw up in her hand. She makes this guy lick it and do this, that, and the other. There's one particular scene in the movie. I'm not going to say it here. That's very controversial, but it is deep. Okay, it is deep. You guys need to check this movie. Check this movie out. But anyway, if you haven't seen it. But anyway, he's talking, oh man, it's the scariest movie I've ever seen. Makes The Exorcist look like nothing, this, that, and the other, which I disagree with that, but whatever. Yeah, it makes The Exorcist look like nothing. I was like, okay, wow. Many, many years later, I'll say in the 90s, I remember going to, back in those days, back in the 90s, they still had video stores and stuff like that, where you would go and pick out movies and stuff like that. They had the DVDs and all this kind of stuff. So I remember, and some of you guys looking at this DVD like, okay, man, DVDs are play it out. Yeah, I do collect physical media. Okay, yeah. Anyway, I digress. So I remember going to the video store and I pick up this movie, the Antichrist, A.K.A. The Tempter. And it didn't look like this. It was just simply called The Tempter. And it was not a DVD. It was a VHS tape. So I went and put it in and I watched it on my VCR. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this movie is insane, man. This movie is insane. And it was scary. It was scary. And there are some scenes in the movie that top The Exorcist in terms of profane acts that this lady commits, okay? There are some scenes in this film where the woman that's possessed does things that make the young girl in The Exorcist look like nothing, okay? It's pretty profane. But was it scarier than The Exorcist? I would argue no, but then again, I was older then. When I saw The Exorcist when I was 4 years old. Yeah, 4 years old. 1973. My older sister took me to go see it. When I saw The Tempter, I was in my 20s. So a lot of these films didn't have the same effect on me as they did when I was a little boy. So, you know, you take it as you do. But anyway, yeah, the Antichrist. But anyway, in terms of scares, the Antichrist, a.k.a. the Tempter, does have some legit scares. Is it on the same level of The Exorcist? I'd say no. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that. I wanted to give you a little brief review of this film, The Antichrist, a.k.a. the Tempter. I think there are many other titles to this film. If you haven't seen it, and if you are a fan of movies from the 1970s and the 80s, I highly recommend this film. It's worth watching, okay? It's worth checking out, okay? Now, there are some scenes in it that the dubbing is kind of messed up, but that's okay. You know, you should be used to these kind of movies from that era. Yeah, The Antichrist. Check it out. Check it out. Now, my next review will be, as I said earlier, dun, 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 dun. You ain't supposed to see this scene right here. You ain't supposed to see this over here. Let me block this right here. Block that. That's why you don't want to see that. Yeah. Abby. Check. That's going to be the next one. That's going to be the next review. Abby is going to be the next review. Check that out. Check out my next video, and we will be reviewing Abby. So I hope you guys enjoyed my review of this film, The Antichrist, also known as The Tempter. I'll be joining you guys again. You all have a great day, and God bless you all.